personal essay titled Invisible Hillbilly, and Dr. Catherine Elliott, who will be performing tunes and text, music reviews for stories, and poetry, lecture, recital.
Thank you, Dr. Walker.
And the professor.
Thank you, sir. So, as Dr. Walker said, the title of this is Invisible Hillbilly, and it is about my experiences growing up in and being from West by God, Virginia, a most misunderstood region.
Amen.
Amen. So here we go. So I recently spoke to a friend and colleague, a highly educated woman, PhD like me, who described growing up relatively poor in a small town in Massachusetts. Just by way of conversation, I began to speak about my own childhood in West Virginia. I don't know much about that region, she said, except for the poverty. Well, there it is, I thought. My God, the poverty, and the ignorance, and the poverty. I could see flashing through her mind the images from Coal Miner's Daughter, even though Loretta Lynn's Butcher Hollow is in Kentucky, or Walker's Evans-ish photos of barefoot hillbilly families on dirt roads outside trashy shacks. She seemed surprised to learn that I grew up in a middle-class subdivision in the capital city, Charleston, with color TV, indoor plumbing, and air conditioning, like most other baby boomers, and that nobody in my family, with the exception of one cousin, had ever worked in a coal mine, and that indeed I have never been in a coal mine, only driven by a few. And that's just a fact, not a judgment on coal miners. Of course, it wasn't my friend's fault that she believed the worst stereotypes, and in many cases, those stereotypes are true, just not in mine, but not only not in mine. I read a recent book you might have heard of, J.D. Vance's best-selling Hillbilly Elegy, a compelling narrative, but ultimately superficial in its analysis of the problems faced by poor Appalachians today. Vance tells a harrowing tale of growing up in Kentucky and Ohio, filled with violence, poverty, and drug addiction, but his experiences were radically different from my own. I'm a baby boomer, 30 years older than Vance, from Charleston, West Virginia, the state capital, so I came from a more prosperous and affluent era and area. Vance grew up in a violent, crime-ridden, drugged-out environment compared to which my own modest little neighborhood feels like a 1950s middle-class sitcom. Crime was unknown. People did not lock their doors. And except for a few teenagers like me who started smoking dope in high school, nobody used drugs. People in my neighborhood barely drank. Vance grew up in an Appalachia that had already turned deep red politically and reactionary, as my home state is now, having voted 70% for Trump. But the West Virginia of my youth, pre-1980s Reagan era, before Democrats defected in droves, was true blue, solidly unionized, mostly because of the UMW, the United Mine Workers. Most of my immediate family members, my mother and aunt, my sister, my brother and sister-in-law, are still Democrats, even though my cousins who live in Georgia are all conservative, and I myself have always been a diehard progressive, a child of the 60s. Vance's narrative downplays the degree to which the hardships faced by his hillbilly friends and family were inflicted by globalization, which shut down factories in the mountains and Midwest and outsourced labor overseas, not to mention the pernicious rise of Walmart, which decimated local economies by driving small businesses out of business. I know where his hometown of Middleton, Ohio is, because of all the holidays I drove from my home in either Athens or Atlanta up I-75, the Hillbilly Highway, or one of them, the other being US Route 23, through Cincinnati, where Vance now lives, on west past Middleton to see my family in Dayton, Ohio, once a prosperous and pleasant Midwestern city, now a wasteland of urban blight. Critical as I am of Vance's up by the bootstrap solution to rural poverty, he and I both transcended our immediate situations, but we achieved that with government help. He joined the military, which paid for his education at Ohio State and Yale Law School, while I was able to go to college because my father served in the Navy and left me after he died with veterans and Social Security benefits. Nobody paid for me to go to graduate school, however. I did that through a combination of teaching assistantships and burdensome student loans. When I went to grad school, I knew the job market was poor, but I didn't care. It was all I wanted to do. It was what I had to do. So, both Vance and I were called to something beyond the limitations of our environments, but those environments, and therefore our experiences, were radically different. One of the misconceptions about West Virginia is that it's a southern state, but geographically and culturally, it's both southern and northern. When I first went to WVU, that's West Virginia University, some guys whom I met in the dorm there who were from the eastern panhandle of West Virginia, which stretches out along the Shenandoah Valley toward the Virginia suburbs, made it a point to let everybody know that they weren't hillbillies, unlike we other West Virginians. And indeed, that part of the country is much more like rural Virginia. An important fact about West Virginia is that it's bordered by 5 states: Virginia, Kentucky, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Maryland. The Mason-Dixon line runs parallel to West Virginia's northern border, though it cuts off the northern panhandle bordered by Ohio and Pennsylvania. But we grew up referring to people in the South, which didn't include us, as Southerners. Unlike Southerners, I didn't grow up eating grits for breakfast, and when I eat them now, I either put sugar on them, which every Southerner knows is just wrong, or I eat them with shrimp. Nor did I grow up eating collards, cornbread, and black-eyed peas on New Year's Day. You would think that in the Deep South, Athens and Atlanta, where I've lived most of my adult life, most people would be able to relate to a West Virginia hillbilly, but they can't necessarily. They wonder whether they would, or could, or should accept me as Southern. If they recall their Civil War history, they recall that I'm not a true son of the Confederacy. When Virginia seceded from the Union in 1861, the counties to the west refused to go along, and West Virginia achieved statehood in 1863, even though the people's allegiances remained deeply divided between the Union and the Confederacy, a split that does much to explain the anomalous and ambiguous regional position in which West Virginians find themselves. The mountain state was not a plantation state, and small farmers in the mountains owned relatively few slaves. Nor are West Virginians, unlike many Southerners, sorry to say this, still obsessed with the Civil War, though again, friends and brothers fought against one another there. But when and where I grew up, a Yankee was either a baseball player, or a serviceman abroad, or a Connecticutian in King Arthur's court. But we neither identified Yankees nor did we speak of them with rancor and resentment. But Southerners wonder, is he a Yankee? Most people in my immediate family sound a lot more Southern than I do, even though my Ohio relatives sound more Midwestern. I think I talk like a Yankee mostly, except when I say y'all, which over time I adopted, and my accent has softened and southernized over the years. But if you were to meet me, you would not know where I'm from based solely on the way I speak. If you are attuned to regional accents, you might guess I'm from somewhere along the mid-Atlantic coast, and that would be truer than you might realize. Still, Southerners and Northerners wonder, how can somebody who talks like a Yankee be from such a hillbilly state like West Virginia? The West Virginians they see on TV tend to talk like the hardcore hillbillies they often are. But to be honest, we made fun of those people and those accents when I was growing up. That Appalachian twang was a clearly delineated cultural marker. When I was growing up in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the greater Kanawha Valley, where Charleston is located, was the site of numerous chemical plants like DuPont and Union Carbide. So the parents of a lot of the kids I went to school with were professional people who had moved to Charleston from points north to work in the chemical industry, and that meant that I grew up hearing accents which were not hillbilly accents. Then I also grew up with TV and movies and radio. Add to that my college education, and all those factors influenced the way I talk. Most people only hear about West Virginia in the aftermath of a disaster. I was 15 years old when the entire Marshall University football team, the Thundering Herd, died in an airplane crash while landing at Huntington's Tri-State Airport. catastrophe recounted in the film We Are Marshall, starring Matthew McConaughey, which some of you've probably seen. Since I am a sucker for sentimental movies about sports and dogs, I took my nephew to see it and wept through practically the entire film. In 1972, in Logan County, 125 people were killed by the Buffalo Creek flood due to coal company negligence. They knew a dam was about to burst, but refused to evacuate miners and their families. And the most common disasters in West Virginia are related to coal mining. The worst mining disaster occurred in 1968 in Farmington, when a mine explosion killed 78 men. Coal and chemical companies find it less burdensome to pay fines for abuses and to compensate for deaths and injuries than to upgrade conditions and comply with regulations. As if that's not bad enough, the coal industry has been systematically destroying the state's environment for decades, either through coal emissions or strip mining or what's called mountaintop removal. For wealthy industrialists, none of whom live in West Virginia, the state is just a gigantic dumping ground. From as early as I can remember, downtown South Charleston, which is a separate city, stank of chemicals, which were emitted by a local plant right on the river. I remember when I was a kid, every summer the city of Charleston would send out this Jeep out to my neighborhood that would emit this toxic cloud designed to kill insects. And as kids, we would ride our bikes behind this vehicle as if we were in a war movie, just breathing in this toxic stuff, right? It's amazing we don't all have cancer. In 1985, a chemical cloud emitted from a carbide plant in Institute, West Virginia, home of West Virginia State University, inflicting minor injuries on several hundred people, and earning Institute the nickname Little Bhopal, based on a much more dangerous gas leak in Bhopal, India in 1984. Most recently, and this you probably heard about, a local coal company leaked chemicals into the Elk River, which flows into the canal, which runs through Charleston, and that made the water undrinkable for months, sort of like what happened in Flint, Michigan, on a smaller scale. But then again, what is the scale for human misery? And what many people have not considered about this, of course, is that the water was probably already contaminated. Now, I do accept the label hillbilly in a qualified way, but I do, even though it's easier to hear coming from another hillbilly, in the sense that that's either derogatory or self-derogatory. And yet, I have problems living as a political progressive in a deep southern state in the age of Trump, living paycheck to meager paycheck as an undercompensated liberal arts professor affected by wage stagnation, battling occasional bouts of depression, living my long-suffering single life, and a few others I won't go into right now. Honestly, probably the least of my problems is that I'm still sometimes stigmatized because I'm from West Virginia. Back in the 1950s, Norman Mailer, American writer, wrote an essay about the birth of the post-World War II hipster called The White Negro, a forerunner of a new kind of personality anticipating the Beat Generation and the 60s counterculture, outcasts who identified with the styles of revolt they found in African American communities. And yet, in the sense of being a disrespected, marginalized group of people, and I don't want to equate white people's experience with black people's experience, because it's not the same, but in the sense of being disrespected and marginalized, are we hillbillies not, in a sense, white Negroes? Maybe we should appropriate slogans from the civil rights movement. Hillbilly power, hillbilly is beautiful, say it loud, hillbilly is proud. Some have adopted the moniker Appalachian American to describe us, which I like, even though that hyphenated phrase refers primarily to race and ethnicity, not region rather. But again, I want to make sure that we understand that this is not about people from Appalachia being oppressed because they're white, right? It's not what I'm talking about at all. It's just about regional stereotypes. And when I say we, I need to make clear that I mean West Virginians I know, my friends and my family, not every West Virginian. And when I say you, I mean those of you who are not only not from Appalachia, but specifically not from West Virginia. And I can't even speak for all West Virginians, much less Kentuckians or North Carolinians. I point to these regional differences partly because, having lived most of my adult life in Georgia, it's easy for me to lose touch with my original sense of where I'm from around so many people who do not share those early experiences. In many ways, even though I've lived most of my adult life in the South, Southerners are not my people. And even my people are not necessarily my people. Chances are very good that other West Virginians reading this will take exception to much of what I say as contrary to their own experiences. Great, fine. Tell your own story. In West Virginia, the question of regional identity is complicated, nuanced, ambiguous. A guy I went to college with once told me that I couldn't really be from West Virginia because I said fucking instead of fucking. Presumably, West Virginians were supposed to drop the G, but I didn't share that assumption at all. Fucking, as an adjective, is just more sharply emphatic than fucking, and I say fucking too, as in fucking a favorite expression. That's just the way I talk. I like to play with language. But to this fellow West Virginian, I was suspect even as a fellow West Virginian. But while I'm trying to explain what it was like growing up in a misunderstood region, my experiences are also my own. I do not regard myself as typical, nor do I even know what typical means. Over the years, when I meet somebody else from West Virginia, I want to see them as simpatico people, but I am almost invariably disappointed that they aren't more fun or interesting than my family and friends back home. But when I say back home, I'm not interested in romanticizing this region or spinning some homey reminiscence of life in the hills. I have to confess that in a way I am a self-hating hillbilly, a little like being a self-hating Jew or a self-hating black man, I guess. But I can't contribute the self-hatred solely to my hillbilliness. Nevertheless, I will admit that I sometimes do feel ashamed, and yet I feel ashamed for feeling ashamed. Being from the hills is both my blessing and my burden. Now, this is, I should say, part of a longer essay that I'm working on that's going to include a lot of autobiographical stuff about my life, and I'm going to skip over that. This would have been the point where I might have gone into that, but to return. Sometimes when I tell someone I don't know well that I'm from West Virginia, they react with a kind of embarrassed silence, as if I'd revealed some vaguely shameful secret, like I'm the incestuous offspring of kissing country cousins, hillbilly mongoloid in disguise. It's the awkwardness that comes from realizing one has nothing to say, no frame of reference. Others simply resort to insult, and certain memories recur with obsessive regularity. A friend who knows how to push my buttons asking me, how does it feel to be from a place everybody else makes fun of? My first job interview at Georgia State University, where the dean of the admissions office, a man named Stansberry from Massachusetts, looked at my resume and said, "Hey, English degree from West Virginia, huh? I thought they spoke English there as a second language." The bartender from Connecticut, who told me to my face that people where he's from don't look down on West Virginians from the Eastern Panhandle, but they do look down on people who come from my part of the state. So, I said to him, even a bartender from Connecticut is better than a college professor from West Virginia. Is that the deal? Yes, apparently that's the deal. But why do people feel free to make those remarks? Why are people from Appalachia, and especially from West Virginia, probably the hillbillies state, the only Appalachian state located entirely within Appalachia, why are we the only ones in this politically correct age whom it's still acceptable to openly ridicule? This guy would never have dared to make fun of me if I had been black, or gay, or Asian, or Muslim, or Latino, but a hillbilly? Not a protected group. Open season on hillbillies. But I asked him, Isn't it true that in this land of opportunity, it matters less where you begin in life and more where you end up? You know, the American dream? No, apparently that's not true. To many Americans, we are still locked in a regional determinism. Place is fate. But I disagree. Character is fate. Labels like Appalachian and hillbilly locate us, but they do not really describe us. They obscure our uniqueness. In The Soul's Code, psychologist James Hillman offers a theory that grants psychological reality to the call of fate and rejects the idea that who we are is determined exclusively by where and how we were raised. Instead of these reductive nature-nurture binaries, Hillman returns us to the psyche in psychology, to the spirit or soul, the presence of what he calls the daimon, D-A-I-M-O-N, a protector or guide that calls us to a destiny which is uniquely ours. At the same time, as an existentialist, I experience myself as the unique individual I am, even among the people around whom I grew up. I am unique, an exception among exceptions. But it was that spirit, that daemon, which first called me out of the mountains and sometimes calls me back. Hillman speaks of moments of annunciation, experiences which in retrospect we can hear calling us to our particular fates. The greatest gift my mother gave me, for example, when I was a kid, was to teach me to read before I started school and to bring to life for me a love for wordplay. Some of you remember this rhyme. Fuzzy Wuzzy was a bear, Fuzzy Wuzzy had no hair, so Fuzzy Wuzzy wasn't Fuzzy Wuzzy.